Good afternoon and welcome to this webinar. I'm Professor Padam Simkhada, Associate Dean for International in the School of Human and Health Science at University of Huddersfield. I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's seminar. It is not as easy as it looks at the police decision making in a serious crime. Before I introduce the speaker, I just wanted to give you an overview of the School of Human and Health Science. We are the largest school here in the university and deliver the education and undertake the research in several areas, including criminology, policing, and forensic and investigative psychology. Our vision is to create the knowledge that has an impact and makes the difference. Key to this is working with the different partners around the world and in the country, and co-design, produce, and disseminate the research to help to inform the policy and practices. As a school, we are proud to work with the partnership with the external key stakeholder and partner, and I'm delighted that we are hosting today's webinar in partnership with the West Yorkshire Police. So in this webinar will start an introduction to the Secure Society Institute by Jason. And Jason is the Professor of Psychology, Crime and Policing, and the Director of Secure Society Institute, and sometimes you will see that as SSI. He's also the Editor-in-Chief for the Police Journal and Visiting Professor at Open University. Currently, his main area of research interest are police and offender decision making, especially in the investigating the homicide, preventing crime using the behavioral science approach such as NEUD, violence crime including child homicide, and the self-selection policing approach, which identify how serious crime can be identified from the small crime that they commit. So Jason will then join in the conversation with the Detective Inspector John Moore. John is a very experienced detective inspector with the West Yorkshire Police, who has investigated the abundance of different types of serious crime over his career, including homicide and sexual offense. John also trained those new criminal investigators. Please note that can I stress again that the John will be answering the question based on his own experience, opinion, and knowledge, and it is he is not speaking on behalf of West Yorkshire Police. Jason and John will be discussing some of the realities and conducting the criminal investigation into the serious crime, this type of decision that have to be made, and some common pitfalls and traps that can produce investigative noise, which can have a negative effect on the decision making of those involved in investigating the serious crime. And how investigating serious crime can be detrimental effect on the well-being of those doing this investigation. There will then be some time for a question answer. Please do post your question or make a comment using probably if you look in the Zoom, there's a Q&A function in the bottom of your screen. Please write any comment or a question on this screen, and we will pick up those questions and we will answer that, or our speaker will answer that question at the end of the webinar. Jason, over to you now.
The classic, sorry, I've committed the cardinal sin of muting myself. Hello, everybody, and welcome wherever you are, and I hope you are well. I'm going to begin by just a few slides about what we do at the Secure Societies Institute, because it's, it's important, and if you're interested in crime, then that's kind of what we do. And I'm desperately trying to find where I've put my slides now. There we are. Okay, so at the Secure Societies Institute, it's very much about looking at crime, policing and security from many different angles and disciplines. Crime is a multifaceted, multi kind of disciplinary phenomenon, and it needs people to look at it from all sorts of thinking areas and sorts of different disciplines. So one of the key objectives of the Secure Society Institute is to draw all academics that are working in anything to do with crime or security, or that could be used in crime or security or prevention, across the 6 schools of the university. Other objectives include to help solve complex crime, policing and threats to national security by encouraging a more joined up and collaborative thinking and action. So not in isolation, not expecting the police to be able to solve crime on their own, nor academic searchers be able to solve the problems of crime on their own, but by bringing all sorts of professionals and academic researchers together to focus on what is really important and what will have most impact on trying to reduce crime and increase security in any society, and particularly in the UK. It's also about encouraging a practical focus on problem-orientated approach, if you see, if really, and that's about looking at problems specifically. So not treating crime as one homogeneous entity that will be solved by one size fits all kind of response. It isn't. There's lots of aspects to crime. It happens in various places in different ways. And we need to take that on board. And again, that takes people from different practitioner experience, police, community support people, other people who work for the council, etc., and members of the public, looking at a host of different crime and security problems. And as I said before, it's about bringing people, and that's essentially what my job is to bring people, colleagues across the university together to focus on crime from their particular angle. So there may well be designers, and it'll be about designing perhaps buildings that are more crime resistant, or it might be products that are more crime resistant, or it might be colleagues from IT working in cybercrime and trying to stop cybercrime. So, it isn't the remit of criminologists and psychologists at all. We need to look at crime from a wider angle, and that's what we do with the Secure Societies Institute. Some of our main themes at the moment, as you can see there, are security is a big one. And for example, radicalisation, we have colleagues working, looking at what radicalisation and how it happens and how it might be prevented. Terrorism as well. We have particularly anything from Northern Ireland to other areas of kind of terrorism and different ideologies. And we have people looking at the prevent strategy and seeing kind of how that fits in and whether that kind of works and how it may be improved. Cybercrime is another area, of course, is a growth area. It's a reality. So identity fraud, we have people looking at identity fraud and how that might be countered or prevented. Cybersecurity in general, so how we might give information and how research might inform people to be better protected, and large sort of companies and organisations to be better protected against cyber crimes. And online radicalisation as well, where kind of people are being radicalised or being kind of or joining some extremist groups by online means. Forensic science is another area, and we have forensic scientists at the university, and we have one who's a forensic archaeologist looking at bones from crime scenes, etc. Forensic genetics, so DNA and how that might be used in evidential purposes, and forensic toxicology, and that's looking at people doing research, looking at kind of substance abuses and how you can tell whether somebody has been poisoned or ingested a poison. And then we have the wider area of policing and crime, and that's the main areas there are trying to prevent crime, and that can be from decision making. So that could be from looking at the sort of decisions that offenders will make and what will put them off choosing a target, to police decision making, which is what the subject of today is, where we will look at kind of how the police make decisions, quite often in as a reaction to how offenders make decisions. It's kind of a bit of an arms race between the two in the case of serial offenders. And criminal investigations, again, how can we help police in criminal investigations, be that the science, be that the thinking, be that the kind of, the approaches that they use, and other areas of crime and policing as well. So there's just some of the main kind of themes that we're looking at the moment. I'm going to start today by trying to, today, hopefully, and the conversation that I'll have with John in a minute, will dispel a few myths for people whose information about kind of how they've been informed about criminal investigations has been via the popular fiction, drama series, etc. So I'm going to start with people like, Sherlock Holmes, who's probably the archetypal detective. yeah, a great detective, wasn't a police officer, but was a consultant detective, but a brain, that could sort of, deduce all sorts of wonderful, amazing kind of deductions from crime scenes, etc. And other people like Helen Mirren, who was in Prime Suspect, who was very driven, one of the only female high-ranking officers in the program, which reflected policing at the time, actually, but an excellent detective. Poirot, of course, you're familiar with Poirot, a little Belgian man who had quite a lot of obsessional compulsive disorders, but was actually brilliant at solving crimes. And bottom left, Robbie Coltrane in Cracker, which I must admit seduced me in the 1990s into doing the sort of things that I do. I wanted to be him. I now realise how ridiculous that was. But somebody who can, get into the mind of an offender and work out kind of what's going on and what they're likely to do in their behaviour. The other two there from the Sweeney, Regan and Carter, which were your seat with your pants, driving fast, hard drinking kind of villain catchers. And then from The Bridge, whose name is Saga, kind of, again, a brilliant detective. Now, why have I put these up? And what's the but? Brilliant detectives, but, well, they're all in some way quite strange human beings. Okay, so Sherlock Holmes, probably sociopath. In fact, in the new Sherlock, he gets quite angry. Benedict Cumberbatch gets quite angry and says, I'm not a psychopath, I'm a high-functioning sociopath. So ever so slightly odd, different. Robbie Coltrane in Cracker, alcoholic, gambler, neurotic, all sorts of, can only hold it together whilst working, a bit of a car crash emotionally, as goes for many of the fictional kind of detectives. The only thing that they seem to be able to be good at and hold it together is their work. Other than that, emotional car crashes. And Poirot, as I said before, with his obsessional compulsive disorders, and all sorts of kind of eccentricities. The point I'm making here is that the fictional portrayal of detectives is often that they are quite flawed individuals. There's something, they're just not quite right, but they are brilliant at what they do. So my first question really will be, in a minute, is that a fair portrayal of kind of, what detectives actually are? And I must admit, when I started working with detectives or criminal investigators about 20 years ago, I did buy into that kind of stereotype. I did think that at the end of the day, we were going to go to the pub and then stay there for 3 weeks and then get driven home incredibly quickly in a fast car, because that's what they did. And I was severely disappointed. They went home at 6 o'clock and some went to the gym. And left me to go home with my own devices. Now, the alternative hypothesis there is, of course, they did go to the pub, just didn't want me to go and told me that they weren't. But since, in the last 20 years, I realised that the fictional portrayals, for me at least, in my experience, aren't that spot on. Detectives are far more down to earth and they have to make incredibly difficult decisions, and everything isn't wrapped up in a nice 2-hour special. There are lots of loose ends and there is lots of hard case decision making that needs to be made. So with no further delay, can I please introduce Detective Inspector John Moore from West Yorkshire Police. Can I also reiterate that Johnny is speaking of his own opinions from his own experiences. He's in no way a spokesperson for West Yorkshire Police. We have to get the legal bit out of the way before John says anything. He is only speaking for himself. John, thank you. Thanks a million for doing this.
You're welcome, Jason.
Fantastic. And thanks for giving up your time. And I know you're a very busy man. So, the first question is, going on from what I was saying about the fictional representation, I mean, that must drive you mad sometimes, or you just stay away from them. Or did that lure you into becoming a criminal investigator in the first place? What was your main motivation for doing what you do now?
I've been in the organisation for 27 years, and I have to say, I looked at all the detectives that you had there on that screen, and I'm surprised you didn't have the bill up.
Yeah, well, it would have been. I didn't have enough room.
Oh, because growing up, I used to watch the bill religiously. Whether it be once or twice a week to every day of the week, if that makes sense. And I think probably me ambition was from probably the bill, if I could say that. You know what I mean? But I wanted to actually make a difference to the people of West Yorkshire as well. So whilst there's the fictional side to it, the actual benefits to myself is that I wanted to do something. I wanted to make something. I just wanted to make a difference, and you might hear that all the time, but I genuinely, from my own heart, that's what I want to do. And I've still got, I've got a couple of years left in the organisation. I've been 27 years, sort of dealing front line, if I can say that, and even to this day, I still want to make that difference, if that makes sense. It's that drive and that passion has never gone away from me from the day I joined the job.
Oh, that's great. I mean, perhaps I should say why I didn't join, because I thought about joining when I was 18, but I was heavily influenced by Morrissey and the Smiths. So two things prohibited it. One, I couldn't swear allegiance to the Queen because that wasn't the done thing in 1988 or 89. And secondly, I don't really do hierarchies, which again was a bit prohibitive of me joining the police, considering it's a hierarchical. But on reflection, maybe I chose the right thing in knocking around with and doing research with cops rather than being one.
Yeah.
What do you mean? Yes, thanks very much. Okay, so
it's the Smiths factor.
It's the Smiths factor. Yeah, I know. It comes out. It's like a millstone around my neck.
I'm only joking, by the way.
I'm not. Although it's we were talking about the popular depictions of kind of, even now you're watching, there's always, they are flawed individuals. There's always something slightly wrong with them, isn't there? They can't handle, the emotional car wrecks. It seems to be what we want to see. We want to see someone almost with a gifted kind, with a gift that none of us have other than these people.
I actually, if you don't mind me saying, I stay away from these programs. I'm heavily invested in my work during, from day one, when I started as a probationer on the streets of, we're first based in Kirklees itself, in Huddersfield Town Centre. And how I've always worked is, if I've dealt with something that day, I'm reading about it at night time just to maintain my skills and maintain my knowledge. I have honestly just kept away from them types of programs, and I've never watched Line of Duty or whatever. I've never watched it. I've no interest in it because from me, I'm dealing with real life, and that isn't real life. That's how I sort of I split it.
Well, that's common. I mean, if you go to a builder's house who's been building all day, it's only half finished because they don't want to come home and start building again. Do you know what I mean? So I can see where you're coming from. I tend to stay away from them, but sometimes it's on and the rest of the family are watching it and I get sucked in. But then I get angry when everyone's suited up and they're doing a crime scene, and then the SIO turns up, senior investigating officer, and just walks straight across it without a suit on. That would never happen. So coming back to sort of the fictional depiction of these gifted yet flawed kind of detectives, do you think that good detectives are born or that they're made?
I think if I'm, I do a lot of running and I do a lot of triathlons and that sort of thing. And there's a phrase where it's 10% natural ability, 90% hard work. I'm going to compare that to myself. I would say, as a detective, when I first joined the job, I would say I'm going through throughout my service, 10% natural ability, 90% hard work. I am constantly working to try and improve myself. However, over the last few years, the way the policing's evolved and developed, where people coming in and getting the degree and going down universities at routes, I'm seeing where I would say it's probably the natural ability is a lot higher than myself, if that makes sense, and the hard work is probably not everybody's different. You know what I mean? And I think it's a very difficult question for me to give an answer, because I always compare it against myself. Your ability for this job may be different from mine. Everybody's makeup's different. Does that make sense?
No, I entirely agree with you. I mean, I spend a lot of time with criminal investigative detectives, and they're all different. I don't think there is one, other than being passionate and being kind of dedicated and wanting to do the right thing or get the right outcome for victims and the victims' families. Other than that, everybody's different. And I think that should be the case. I don't think that we do need people that are kind of that are going to fall apart but are really good at investigating, because they're not going to last 5 minutes, are they? Let's face it.
No.
Yeah.
And then going down the actual policing family, there's that many different roles within the organisation, which all different roles will have an element of being a detective within that, if that makes sense. You know, whether it's going to deal with a shoplifter to even a car parking ticket, there'll be some level of detection in it, but it's just what level of people are happy at. You know, I've been involved in a lot of serious crime over a lot of years, but I've had to work up to that. You know, it's not like I've just walked into it and here, yeah, John, deal with that. It's almost like in a sporting arena. You know, if you were a really gifted footballer or a sportsman and you could go straight into that team, it's not often, is it? You're often nurtured, if that makes sense. And then once you get into that team, you then become established. And I think it's very, very comparable, really. I'm sort of going down the sports route with abilities, you know.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Can you tell us a little bit? I mean, it's a long while ago now, I would imagine, but you know, if you can remember the kind of first serious crime investigation that you were involved with. Are you allowed to tell us a little bit about it? You know, no names or anything, but a little bit about it and kind of how you felt when you were kind of part of this.
I mean, obviously, with 27 years.
I wasn't even born then, but yeah, you know,
it's a long time. It's a long time to think about. The actual elements of the investigation, one of the first serious ones that I remember, it was a Section 18, which is a wounding offence, and it involved somebody on a night out using a car to basically run somebody over. They used the car as a tool to run them over, and they got serious injuries. And I remember, because at that time when I first decided to go down the specialism route, I was looking towards going towards the roads policing side. So, you know, I was an aspiring. I wanted to be roads policing, and obviously with the use of the car as a weapon in this case, I just wanted to take the job on and do it right as I would do today, if that makes sense. And I can't actually, because it's so long ago, remember what I did with the investigation. I can't talk you through it because it's too long ago. But I remember there were certain elements of it, and this is what I tell people now. And I looked at every single route on this investigation, to the point where they tried to burn the car out. And you know, at the time you were looking at CCTV inquiries and et cetera, and I managed to locate the car in the middle of nowhere. And it got recovered. And if I remember rightly, I think they'd not successfully got rid of the car, and it left with some forensics, which led to that inquiry progressing. And I remember going to Crown Court where they eventually pleaded guilty. They didn't go for a trial or anything like that, and they got you know, quite a hefty sentence. But the feeling, because I was very young in service, and the feeling I got was at the end of that, more for the victim and for myself, was real satisfaction. I can't talk to you about, because it's so long ago, about the intricacies of the investigation, because you know, I just can't remember. But I do remember the feeling coming out of Crown Court and the sense of achievement I got. And it was a real naughty job. It was a nasty job, and I was like, forgive me for what I'm going to say this, but I was like a dog with a bone, and I wasn't letting go. I wanted to pursue it. If some information come in, I were at it. If there was, I were reading statements. I was going over the statements. I was assessing it. I wasn't letting go, and that's what I try and teach now. When I've done an input today for new detectives on in an area, and that's how I tell people how to look at the jobs, look at your source information, follow that lead, because that lead won't follow you. You've got to. I think that I'll use the phrase "chase the tail," if that makes sense, but it's in a positive way. Chase the tail is not probably a good. What I'm trying to say, follow the lead, follow your gut instinct. Your gut instinct of a job's never going to let you down. It's going to it's going to bring more up. You're going to get a feeling for somebody, and that job produced good results. That's all I'll say. You know, it were a naughty job, it were a nasty job, and it's a long time ago now.
Oh well, yeah. I thought I'd start with the first one, but I didn't realise it was so long ago. That's probably a bit unfair of me, really. But there you go. I do apologise. Okay, so let's talk about. We're talking about decision making, yeah, and it's kind of easy on the television because the clues are there, aren't they? Somewhere, yeah. Even if it's Scooby Doo, and you're going back and they're showing you all the clues for how you could work out who it was. I know it's not like that in real life. I mean, it is if the offender is at the scene when you get there and you arrest them, but if not, if it's a bit of a whodunit, you've got to put a little input in to actually try and identify the offender. Let's start with some of the more routine decisions that you have to make. So irrespective of what the serious crime is that you're looking at, what kind of some of the routine decisions that you have to make along the way, just to get those ones kind of out of the way first?
We've got, have you heard of the 5 building blocks? Yeah, we've got the 5 building blocks. Now, in terms of the 5 building blocks, you've got to take that. It's got to be fluid. Just for anybody that's listening, I'll go through the 5 building blocks, but it's obviously protecting the scene, protecting the victim, identifying the suspect, securing the evidence, following all that reasonable lines of inquiry, etc., etc. Now, in terms of that, it's fluid. So, if it's a job that's coming now, okay, the decision would be what information do we know, what's been said, where are people, you know, getting somebody out there as a resource to go and secure that evidence, go and secure that person, make sure they're safe. If they need medical treatment, that obviously takes priority over everything. You know, it could even have infringements on a crime scene, etc. You've got to override that because at the end of the day, it's about protecting life and limb. And I think the biggest thing within an early stage of investigation is, one, make sure you're listening to what people are saying to you. Make sure your eyes are open. You can see what's happening. Make sure you're listening. You're taking it in. And you're recording what's happening. Because if that isn't happening, and if I come to a scene and you're telling me stuff and I'm not engaging with what you're saying, I'm losing a lot of evidence, a lot of information there. So the early inception of the crime is about getting as much information as you can. You know, it's not about, right, I'll come to you, Jason, I'll get your statement here and now. You know, it might just be a couple of lines from you, getting as much, because, you know, you might not be in a position to disclose everything. And who's around, having a look at the scene. What's about? Is there any NPR cameras? You know, do I need somebody here to support me? So when I talk about the 5 building blocks, historically, from when I first got trained as a detective, that's what they go down. But now it's got to the point where within them 5 building blocks, you've got little evidential blocks within the building blocks. And I don't want to make it too complicated with that. There's different elements that you've got to consider. But the most important thing is, obviously, you've got to look at the national decision-making model. If you make decisions based on what you are told at that time, you aren't going to go far wrong. And you've also got to remember this. If you do make a decision and you've recorded it, and that decision turns out to be actually not the right one or a bad decision, you know, nobody should criticise you for that, because you can only go on off what you know. And actually, I always advocate this. If you make a decision and you've not recorded it and it's wrong, then your actual decision that you've made hasn't happened. You've not recorded it. It's not happened. Because it'd be all right later on. You could come to me, Jason, and say, you've made a decision to arrest him. You've arrested the wrong person. Where's that recorded? Oh, well, I've just done it now. You go down the integrity and the transparency bit. So, you know, going down the decision-making route, there's so many elements to it that probably I won't be able to fit in within the time span that we've got to answer it. But the biggest thing is recording your decisions. That's all I can sort of say, really. And don't be afraid.
Yeah. Okay, it's fair to say that, of course, a lot of the kind of fictional representations of this, the detective has got acres of time in which to deliberate and make decisions on their own, whereas kind of in my experience, I'm sure in your experience of and my experience of observing, you've got to make lots of decisions at the same time. You don't have the benefit, simultaneously, and in a pressurized environment. And I think that doesn't translate from many of these series, in the same way. I'm going to come back to something you mentioned before, because I've done some research on this myself, trying to understand it, and that is gut instinct. And you cops love using that, don't you? I feel it in my gut. Yeah. What do you actually mean by that when you say that? What are you referring to?
I'm trying to give you an example. It's quite a good question, actually.
Well, thanks very much.
Yeah. No, I mean, another. I don't know if you've heard the phrase of a copper's nose as well.
Yeah.
I just think sometimes you can get the sense for something. It's like a sixth sense. That's all I can sort of say. I can't really say anything else. It's probably something that's I've picked up during my 27 years. And actually, I would say I don't think there's many times I've been wrong. I can't tell you what that feeling is. But you've got to understand your material. You've got to understand what's being said. And whilst I say I can't think of any times I've been wrong, I'm sure there has. I'm also the first one that if I've got something wrong, I'm not afraid to apologise and say, look, I'll hold my hand up. And I think that's the human side to us, which is really important. Which I think sometimes will be lost on your programs. You don't. I can't recall programs where there would be, Jason, I'm really sorry, I'll hold my hands up, I've messed up here. It were somebody else. There's a human element to this. It's not as it's portrayed.
No, and
bear in mind you've got to make them decisions sometimes in a split second. A split second. So
no, I appreciate that. And that some of the research you've done around kind of trying. You remember the old? They still use it, I think, but the old phrase of someone being an ace thief taker.
Yeah.
Right. So somebody, this, but just for the benefit of everybody else. You said for the benefit of the tape there. I've always wanted to say that. For the benefit of everybody, an ace thief taker is somebody that the cops consider as one of their own, a police officer who can spot a wrong in a crowd, and it's just something about them that they can tell. It's coming back to your gut feeling, which is really your intuition based on experience, all that kind of experiential knowledge. And I've been interviewing over the last few years. I need to do some more. I've been interviewing these people who've been nominated by various police forces as being ace thief takers, so the sort that has a reputation for being really good at spotting people. And what I've found so far, without kind of putting the cart before the horse, because I've only done sort of 10, is that and this will probably resonate with you, is that they've got very good memories for faces and very good memories for numbers, like number plates. So they're very good at that. Yeah. But what I think is, and I feel like a magician here revealing their magic tricks and, to everybody, is that they're also prepared to be wrong. Yeah. And they'll be very polite and they'll say, I'm really sorry, I got it wrong. I'm talking more about uniforms kind of stuff rather than kind of text stuff. And I think, do you think that that's an important part as well? Is you've just touched on that now, is that you can only go on with what you think is the right hypothesis, which is the right kind of way of doing it. But do you need to also be prepared to be wrong and admit that you're wrong? And you kind of touched on that. Do you think that's an important element of
absolutely? Absolutely, because building relationships within the community. From a personal point, if I was to go down the street and say I arrest you, and then later on, whether I was right or wrong to arrest you, I then see you in the street the next day, I would rather come up and be able to have that conversation with you and build that rapport with you, and and build that relationship up, if that's the right word. Rather than walk down the street, see you and walk the other way, at the end of the day, I would say to you, Jason, I'm only human, and actually, I apologise for what's just happened. that these were the reasons. And I think that goes a long way. You know, when you look at sort of try to build strengths and relationships within the community, I think, you know, the human side goes a long way. You know, and I'd like to think over the years, certainly the human side to myself has come out. That it's really important to me, that.
Okay, and I'd probably say thanks very much, but get lost, copper. But you know, it wouldn't be personal just because you arrested me the day before when you shouldn't have. But if we go back to kind of the realities of this, and I'm trying to get to sort of into some of the decision making kind of psychology that you're talking about now. So being prepared to be wrong is an important thing, yeah. And we know when we look at historic examples like the Yorkshire Ripper investigation, etc., that certain people there weren't prepared to be wrong. And it kind of derailed everything. Okay, so that's incredibly important. What other kind of facets do you think that are really important to a detective or a criminal investigator like yourself in terms of making balanced decisions? In terms of, so for example, I'm saying, you know, if you form a first hypothesis about what's gone on and who's likely to be responsible, how set in stone is that? Yeah,
it's not set in stone at all.
Can you easily shift when you get new evidence, you get new information? Is it easy to? Do you have to learn that, or is that part of being a detective?
No, I mean, I've been on various courses throughout the years. You know, from tier 2 to tier 5. Those are different levels of investigators. I'm currently a tier 5 investigator, and I've been on all sorts of courses, and it's something that you learn. I've been blessed, if I can say that, by being taught by some of the people that I hold closely to my heart, if I'm honest with you, in that they were the best detectives that could have taught me. They really were really, really good. Some of their stuff that they taught me I still hold to this day. And building hypotheses up. So at the early stage, I built an hypothesis up. I think this has happened. I document that. And then as it goes along, if things change, I am prepared to write, well, actually, my hypothesis at 9 o'clock this morning was this, at 6 o'clock tonight, because of the information that's come in, it's this. Again, you are being human. You're not a robot, you are human. And again, I go back to the national decision-making model. If you're saying it goes along like this, and then it ends up in the court process and it goes down to a defence defending, because at the end of the day, they've got a job to do with the defence, and they look at your thought process. They can see where you're going. They might ask you some questions, etc. But if you go down the lines of, well, I've got no idea what's happening, and I'm just going to lift Jason because I don't like the look of him.
Yeah, you seem to be arresting me a lot, don't you?
Yeah. It's your bad day today, Jason. Apologies.
Yeah, you're picking on me.
But it's really, really important that the hypotheses as you go along is as fluid as it can be.
Okay.
You know, it's not about being rigid. It's not about if I'm stuck at it, I'm sticking to my hypotheses, and you're almost going down the lines of, I'm going to nail you, Jason, no matter what.
Again, go on. Yeah, this is turning into harassment. You know that.
But you see where I'm coming from. You've got to have that other outlook, that other perspective.
Yeah. Do you think this is a cultural change then over the last 20 odd years? Because a lot of the famous kind of derailed investigations or awfully bungled investigations, the opposite happened, didn't it? People kind of, you know, it was almost like sort of, you know, they couldn't say that they thought things were going wrong because the SIO wouldn't listen to them, or they didn't feel that. Do you know what I mean? There was no kind of acknowledgement of being wrong or possibly being wrong. And I use again the Yorkshire Ripper investigation as one of the kind of the best examples of this.
Again, I think training's changed completely. You know, we used to have the National Police Improvement Agency, where we looked at the murder manuals, the core investigator doctrine. You know, along that, we've actually encouraging people to maybe challenge decisions. Yeah. You know, so if an SIO, you know, like now has made a decision, and I just think, hang on a minute, it's not right, being able to challenge it and not being not suffering any fallout because of that challenge. It's got to be professional, don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
You know, going back to years ago, I can't really comment. You know what I mean?
No.
But I do think it has. You know,
Yeah.
from my perspective, over my 27 years, I think it is improving. And you know, if there were a decision that was made by my DCI tomorrow, and actually I thought you're making a decision here that maybe not right, I certainly would challenge that. But it won't be a case of challenging as in a speak. It will be documented as well.
Okay, that's fantastic. Right. Let's go with, okay, this was a difficult one, so whatever comes to mind really. But what do you think? Why do you think some cases, in your experience, why are they more difficult to solve or even impossible than others? What are the kind of key elements here that we're looking at for?
I think, again, it's my own feelings. I think sometimes we might overcomplicate things and not actually. There's a phrase of not seeing the wood for the trees. Sometimes I just don't. I think I talk to younger detectives and I talk about you are sometimes on a fast-moving treadmill. And if you're on a fast-moving treadmill and you're not fit enough to keep up that treadmill, you run out of breath and you run out of steam. And an investigation could be like that, because if you're fast-moving and you're not looking at what you've got, you're going to miss things. Whereas if you slow it down and take your time to look at your source material, look at your information that you've got, you are going to see lines of inquiry which will help you. And I just think sometimes we can't see the wood for the trees, and I think we also complicate things when it doesn't need to. And then obviously the other bit is when it goes to the Crown Prosecution Service, you've then got issues where you know, the Crown Prosecution Service can only advise on what we supply them, you know, in terms of disclosure and that sort of thing. And if somebody is going to the Crown Prosecution Service and they're overcomplicating to the point where they can't articulate that, I just think it can become a bit messy.
Okay, right. Last question, and I've done, and myself and colleagues have done quite a lot of research around this, particularly with investigators of homicide, and particularly where the victim is a child. Yeah, and this is a question about well-being. How do you deal with the emotional barrage of, you know, assault on you when you're involved in such a heinous and abhorrent and emotionally charged crime as the murder of a child or you know, a murder of another human being? How do you personally deal with that? You know, how do you stay sort of vaguely on the straight and narrow and sane when you're in this really charged kind of atmosphere? What do you do? What's your secret?
Well, I mean, I'm going to be totally open here. A number of years ago, I actually became quite poorly with this sort of scenario. You know, I was dealing with these type of jobs, which became emotional, and if you don't mind me saying, I sort of hit the brick wall, and I had to take I had to take some time out because it affected me so much. And looking back at that, I think the one thing that I didn't do was one, speak to people. You know, you can't bottle it up. You've got to speak. You've got to look for people. You've got to recognise within yourself the signs. At the time, I didn't see the signs. I think other people around me saw the signs, and actually, I could talk quite a bit about what happened to me. And I ended up having quite a bit of time off. It's probably one of the grey areas in my life that it's just a grey area, and it's quite emotional and quite sensitive for me.
Yeah.
But what I learned from that, so I went to, we've got a convalescent home at Harrogate, and I went there, and at the time there's quite a number of other people at the same point myself, and being able to talk to people, I got some counselling. And then I came away, and I didn't actually go back into the line of work that we're doing for quite a while. I actually just it was small steps for me to where I'm now back in this business, if I can sort of say. And I've got to the point now where I can recognise the signs. I know what to do. As in, you know, like if I've got a job today and actually I can just feel actually the stress is building up here. I'm not afraid to put the laptop down. I'm not afraid to put the phone down and go for a walk and take some fresh air.
Yeah.
Or even go and do some exercise, or go and speak to friends, family, you know, a pet or something like that.
Yeah.
What I've done for my team, learning from that, is I've sort of developed where we speak, we're open about each other, and we have that confidence as well. And you know, if any of my team are feeling like I did years ago, because I don't want anybody, I'm really cutting this short because I know we're a bit short for time, but I don't want anybody to go through what I went through a few years ago. And recognising the signs, I've put support in place where, Jason, you're on my team today. You're feeling it. I've got a connection with Harrogate Convalescent Home, where I just have a referral to go there, spend a couple of days to chill.
Okay.
You know, it's a question that I just think needs a lot of time to answer.
Okay. Well, thank you for being so candid. You can see what a loss I was to the world of clinical psychology, by the way, that I'm in such a supportive way that I want to give you a hug, man, but you're kind of at the other side of...
No, I mean, I'll just... what I did when one of the signs, and looking back now, I could see the sign of what was happening. And there were jobs coming in, and I was dealing with child protection jobs.
Yeah.
And what would happen is, I'd get to the certain point. I didn't recognise this at the time, and I were inside an office, and to try and say I've had enough, because I couldn't get rid of the emotional leakage. You know, to see what I was seeing, I used to put a hat on my head, and everybody at the time around me thought that's unusual. You know what? and you know, it'd be like 30 degrees outside, and I'd be sat in the office with a hat on my head, and I didn't think anything about it. It was just on the head. And looking back, I knew that was a cry for help.
Yeah.
And you know, I work part of my thing. I don't know if you've heard of the Bluestone project. So one of the elements of that is about welfare, looking after yourself, looking after your staff. And, you know, it's a vital element. Is that really, really vital?
Well, I think that, you know, you're absolute star. And thanks for telling us that. And it might go some way to explaining why you're into triathlons as well, don't you think?
Yeah.
Okay, John, we're an absolute star. You know, perhaps you should have taken legal representation when we offered it to you right at the beginning of this conversation. But,
well, you're needed a solicitor because I've locked you up that many times in the last hour.
You have, and then I was working for you. I couldn't work that one. Okay, so are you up to answer some questions then?
Yeah.
Come through, and we'll go back to Padam, and he's going to kind of referee it, or whatever you call it, chair it. Okay. Thanks anyway.
So thank you, Jason and John, such an interesting debate and discussion. We have several questions from our audience. I will start some of them. The first question is what more can we do to expose the academic finding to police officer to help them make a better evidence-based decision?
Shall I take that one?
Yeah, please.
Okay, what more can we do? Well, in the last 5 or 10 years, the academic kind of research and policing has come together like it never did before. We have the Society of Evidence-Based Policing, which is very much trying to embed evidence in a non kind of criminal sense, but evidence in a sense from research evidence that things work into policing, and it is being taken up. So instead of just doing what police always used to do, for example, I was working with Durham Police on trying to reduce burglary, but they had a lot of burglaries that were recorded that were actually thefts from sheds in people's gardens, things were being taken. And I said, well, what would you ordinarily do about this? And they said, well, we would give out a leaflet to people that live around here, telling them that, you know, sheds are getting broken into. And I said, well, did it work, or does it work? And he said, I don't know, but we've literally got a whole filing cabinet full of them. we've moved on from that because that ain't evidence-based policing. That's convenience crime prevention because you've got all these leaflets. So we're actually, and I spend a lot of time doing this, working with police to looking at specific problems, crime problems, breaking them down and coming up with or working or finding a really kind of a solution that will stand more chance of working than just a random knee-jerk reaction to something. And that's my example of how academic research and policing have come together considerably over the last 10 years. I'm not saying we've got there completely. Yeah, I'm not saying it's finished, but there's a lot less animosity. For the police don't have the same animosity and kind of cautiousness around academics that they used to have sort of 10 years ago.
Thank you. They're very clear. Another question, probably for John, is how important is experience in the quality of an investigation and decision made in the investigation?
I think in terms of decision making, so if you've got a trainee investigator that's come into the into an investigation, if they've got the right supervision, the experience with the supervision, I think it's in terms of experience for the trainee investigator. I'm trying to word this rightly. So if you've got a trainee investigator, obviously their experience is going to be limited, if that makes sense. If they've got a sergeant, a detective sergeant who's making the decisions, it shouldn't affect anything. So like if Jason's my trainee investigator, he just come fresh from training school, we've got a serious investigation going. I, at the start of that investigation, with my experience, say, Jason, and it's documented, say, do X, Y, and Z, and Jason goes and does that. But during the course of that, he picks up on some of the stuff that he does between us. Obviously, Jason's experience is limited, but mine's vast. It shouldn't affect anything. Whereas if Jason's experience is limited and mine's limited, then I would say that the next level, which would be the inspector, you'd like to think that might be a little bit more experience, because you're just putting that bit of a concrete base there, if that makes sense, to strengthen everything up.
If I could just add to that as well, in my experience, 20 years ago, if you became a detective, you became a detective constable. It was all about on-the-job learning. In the last 20 years, our police officers, our detectives are the best trained in the world. So it's not all left up to experience. You can expedite the necessary experience by giving people knowledge. Yeah, and that's where we are now. We are light years ahead of many other countries in terms of the professionalization of our criminal investigators is second to none. Yeah. So 20 years ago, it would have taken you 5 years to get the experience that maybe you needed to do the job properly on your own. Yeah. Not so now, because of the training and the guidance and everything else that's available.
Yeah, totally agree.
Thank you. There's one particular question to John. I think Jason already touched that question in the earlier discussion. Is a question: is in your career, how much have you relied on instinct and gut feeling? Has your trust in your instinct developed over your career, and how have you coped with your instinct that may have been wrong?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, I mean, if you look the question, probably that would be easier for you. If you look the question answer, and that's then probably it's asking question, and you can look that and probably summarize some of the. That's very nice statement. Both Jason and you can look the.
Which one is it? Question 4.
Yeah.
In an investigation, is context used out with decision making, or is context information removed in an attempt to reduce bias? I'm thinking along the lines of person identification, e.g. if you thought you had identified a person responsible for a specific crime, would you check if that person had committed that type of crime or be in that location in the past to aid the identification? Everything's based on information, so I wouldn't just go down lines of, I'm going to put so-and-so on an ID parade or anything like that. I would want supported evidence. I hope that kind of answers that. I won't just go down to And also as well, again, I keep repeating on this thing about knowing your source information, knowing where it's come from, you know, testing that account, testing where it's come from. So, you know, before I'll make a decision of say, right, I'm going to put Jason on an ID parade, I'd want to do more inquiries before I do something like that.
Also, I'd add to that as well, it isn't all about eyewitnesses now, of course. There's CCTV cameras everywhere. There's all sorts of other passive kind of information that you can get that you will put into the mix when you make your decisions, isn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want me to read the next one out?
Yeah, I mean, so you can answer this is a lot of questions. Probably we won't have a time to go all the question, but if there's an important point you want to make.
You referenced the degree scheme earlier. What are your thoughts on that? Does a degree add value, or could that time studying better be used on the street to gain real experience? I think the degree scheme is really, really important. I think officers should be given time to devote to the degree scheme, and I think it should be managed potentially better in that, you know, they should have sufficient time to do the degree. It's really, really important. I can't reiterate that, but also getting the on the street experience is really, really important as well. So it's about the management of that. You know, they're both really important, and they're both real ingredients. That's all I can sort of say. I do agree. I think the degree. I've got a degree myself. Did it at Sunderland University. Really, really important. I can't say. I hope that answers that.
Okay, thank you. I mean, so unfortunately, we are running out of time. Is there any final word, both John and Jason, do you want to mention before I close the webinar?
No, I'd just like to thank John again for giving up his time, because he's been an absolute star, and you know, I owe him big style, but I'll sort that out outside of the webinar at some point.
I'll let you out of custody now, Jason.
I'm working for you. I'm in prison. Where am I, for God's sake?
Thank you, Jason. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
No problem.
Okay. Finally, I'm sorry for the audience. There are a few questions that we couldn't answer. Hopefully, you got the sense of the webinar and how important.
Can I just mention there was the last question at the end, which what was the Bluestone project? The Bluestone project and Soteria is work that's been done with the police and academics around serious sexual offences. Really, really, really. If you look it up, you'll be able to find it on there. There's 5 pillars around how we investigate stuff. I'm just trying to do this very, very quickly, and you know, from the work with academics and academia, it's absolutely it's smashing work. Is it? I can't say anything more really, and revolutionising things, if I can say that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you again. Thank you for our both speaker for sharing your insight and experience, which is highly valuable.